My name is Vivian Hart. I am 68 years old, a retired school teacher, and for most of my life, the quiet keeper of a home that meant everything to me. I never thought I would find myself saying these words out loud, but they are the truth. My daughter, Elise, sold my $5 million villa without telling me. Then she slid a $20,000 check across the table and told me to disappear. The paper felt cold under my fingertips. The number looked sharp, almost mocking. $20,000, as if 4 decades of sacrifice, of long nights and early mornings, of love poured into every wall and garden stone, could be reduced to that sum. Elise's eyes did not tremble. Her voice was steady. She said, "Mother, it is better this way. You are too old to handle such a big place. Take this money, rent yourself a small apartment in the city, and live quietly." I sat in silence. I did not raise my voice. I did not argue. I let her words settle into me like shards of glass. I had seen students betray each other. I had seen neighbors fight over fences. But never in my wildest dreams did I imagine my own daughter would treat me as if I were a burden to be removed. The villa was not just a building. It was my history, my memory, my proof that survival was possible. When my husband passed away, I had nothing but 2 small children and a part-time job. We saved every penny. He laid the first bricks with his bare hands, and I planted the first roses by the gate. Each corner of that villa carried his presence. And now, Elise wanted me to walk away from it with nothing but a check that barely covered a few months of rent. The silence between us grew heavy. She mistook my calm for surrender. She thought I had no fight left in me. She smiled, sliding the check closer as if offering me kindness. I looked at her hand. It trembled slightly when she pulled it back. Perhaps she knew, deep down, that what she had done was unforgivable. I reached into my pocket and felt the soft fabric of an old handkerchief, the one my husband gave me on our 20th anniversary. Its threads were frayed, but it carried the weight of years. I pressed it to my palm, steadying myself. My voice, when I finally spoke, was calm. "Is that all I am worth to you, Elise? $20,000? She avoided my gaze. She spoke quickly about investments, about new opportunities, about how this was the smart thing to do. But I heard none of it. All I could hear was the echo of her words. "Mother, disappear." Something shifted inside me at that moment. Pain, yes. Betrayal, certainly. But also a strange clarity. I realized that the fight ahead would not be loud. It would not be filled with shouting or public scenes. It would be fought in silence, in the stillness of documents, in the quiet power of truth, in the unshakable memory of a woman who had given her entire life to building something honest. As she gathered her purse and prepared to leave, Elise leaned down to kiss my cheek. Her perfume was sharp, expensive, unfamiliar. She whispered, "You will thank me one day." And then she walked away, heels striking the floor like a drumbeat of finality. I stayed seated, the check still lying in front of me. I did not tear it. I did not pocket it. I simply stared at it until the numbers blurred into meaningless ink. $20,000. A figure that meant nothing, and yet it carried the weight of a daughter's decision to erase her mother. I whispered to myself, not in anger, but in promise. Elise has no idea what I have already done. The night that followed was the longest of my life. The villa creaked as if it, too, knew it had been betrayed. I walked through each room, touching the photographs, the furniture, the shelves stacked with books my husband once read. I pressed the handkerchief to my lips and stood by the window, watching the sea beyond the cliff. That villa was more than stone and wood. It was my soul, written in architecture. And yet, my own daughter thought she could sell it, silence me with a check, and erase me from it. My name is Vivian Hart. I am 68 years old. And this is the story of how I learned that sometimes silence is the strongest weapon, and that even when your own blood betrays you, you can still stand, you can still begin again, and you can still choose not to disappear. I spent the night in silence, the kind of silence that is not peace, but heaviness. The villa felt like a hollow shell around me. Every corner that once gave me comfort now seemed to echo Elise's words. Mother, disappear. The phrase gnawed at me, repeating itself with every step I took down the long hallway. I paused before the portrait of my husband that hung in the living room. His smile had faded slightly under the years of sunlight streaming through the window. I whispered, "Did we work all those nights for this? Did we starve ourselves of comfort so our daughter could look at this place and see only dollar signs?" I pressed my hand against the glass frame, and for the first time in years, my knees weakened beneath me. The villa was more than walls. It was a timeline of my survival. The garden outside still carried the scent of roses I had planted when Elise was only a child running barefoot on the grass. The kitchen table still bore faint scratches from her homework pencils. The stair railings carried the shine of hands that once steadied her when she was small. I thought, how could she not see that every part of this house was a story of love, of endurance, of family? Yet Elise's voice had been clear, decisive, almost rehearsed. She said I was too old to live here, that she had already signed the papers. Her eyes looked past me, as if I was not even present. I tried to imagine the kind of life she thought she was buying with my sacrifice. A life of champagne dinners, of city apartments far removed from the smell of earth and sea. And I wondered, was she ashamed of where she came from? Or ashamed of me? I sat at the edge of my bed until dawn. The handkerchief my husband once gave me rested in my lap. Its threads were soft from years of being held, but that night it felt heavier, almost like a stone. I found myself talking to it as though it could answer. What am I to her now? A shadow to be erased? A problem to be solved with a $20,000 check? The questions poured from me in silence, and each one sank deeper into my chest. When morning arrived, Elise came again. She was dressed neatly, hair pulled back, her perfume sharp. She placed another folder on the dining table and said, "Mother, I need you to sign these final documents." Her tone was clipped, efficient, as if she were speaking to a client. I looked at the folder without opening it. My voice was steady. "Elise, if your father were still alive, would you have the courage to do this in front of him?" She flinched, just slightly, then straightened her shoulders. "Father would have wanted what was best," she said quickly. "You should not be carrying this weight anymore. You deserve an easy life. Take the money. Rest." But I heard the hollowness beneath her words. Rest. To her, rest meant absence. It meant I should fade away quietly so she could stand in the space I had built. I placed my hand on the handkerchief again and let the silence stretch between us. She tapped the folder with her manicured nail. "Mother, please, do not make this harder than it needs to be." I looked at her, really looked at her, and for the first time I saw not only greed, but pain. A daughter who had once wanted more of my attention. A daughter who had carried resentment. I never noticed. Yet pain does not justify betrayal. My heart ached, but I refused to move. I refused to sign. Elise's lips pressed into a thin line. She gathered the folder back into her bag and left without another word. Her heels struck the floor like a gavel, each step declaring judgment. The door closed sharply, and the sound carried through the villa long after she was gone. The silence that followed was heavy, but not empty. In that silence, I realized something. I was still here. My breath still filled these rooms. My memories still lived in these walls, and I would not let them be erased by a pen stroke or a forged signature. That morning, the villa was quiet. Yet inside me, something had begun to stir. Not anger exactly, but a fragile strength rising out of the darkness. The first crack did not come from Elise's words or the coldness in her eyes. It came from a child's question, spoken with innocence that cut deeper than any accusation. Grace, my granddaughter, arrived that afternoon with her school bag still slung over her shoulder. She dropped it on the floor and ran toward me, arms wide. Her embrace was warm, unfiltered, uncalculated. For a moment, the weight in my chest lifted. She sat beside me at the kitchen table, swinging her legs. "Bah," she said, her voice soft but filled with wonder. "Am I still allowed to come play at the villa?" She did not know what had happened the night before. She did not know about the check or the forged documents. She only knew that this house had always been her playground, her sanctuary. My throat tightened. I brushed a strand of hair from her forehead and forced a smile. "Of course, Grace. This is still your home, too." But even as the words left my lips, I felt their fragility. The truth loomed behind me like a storm. Elise appeared in the doorway, holding her phone, irritation flashing across her face. "Grace, do not bother your grandmother with questions like that. Go upstairs and do your homework." Grace hesitated, her eyes darting between us. She lowered her head and slipped away without protest. The silence she left behind was louder than her question. Elise crossed the room, heels clicking against the wooden floor. "Mother," she said, her voice clipped. Do not fill her head with false hope. Children do not understand property or responsibility. I looked at Elise, really looked at her, and for a fleeting moment, I saw the child she once was. She used to run through these halls just like Grace, hair flying, laughter ringing. Now she stood before me as a woman who spoke of contracts and obligations, as though love could be signed away. My fingers clutched the handkerchief in my pocket. Its fabric grounded me, a reminder of who I was before these battles began. "Elise," I said quietly, "is that how you see me? As someone who poisons her granddaughter with false hope?" She avoided my eyes. She muttered something about practicality, about how Grace deserved stability, not empty promises. But I heard the tremor in her tone. Later, as Grace prepared to leave, she slipped a drawing into my hand. It showed the villa, with flowers around the gate and a sun shining above it. Beside the house were 3 stick figures, one tall with glasses, me, one with long hair, her mother, and one small, smiling, that was Grace herself. At the top she had written, "My family's villa." I folded the paper carefully and placed it in the same pocket as the handkerchief. 2 fragile anchors, one from the past, one from the future, resting together against my heart. That night, I sat by the window long after Grace had gone. I could still hear her question echoing in the empty halls. Am I still allowed to come play at the villa? It was such a simple request, yet it revealed the fracture forming beneath us. Elise thought she was building a future. What she was really building was a wall between generations. The first crack had appeared, and it was not mine. It was hers. Elise's choices were not only breaking me, they were breaking her own daughter's trust. I knew then that this was no longer about property. It was about what kind of legacy would remain once I was gone. As the night deepened, I pressed the drawing flat against the window pane. The paper trembled in my hands. I whispered into the darkness, if only love were enough to hold walls together. But sometimes it takes truth, even painful truth, to keep them from falling apart. And so I sat, holding on to the handkerchief and the drawing, knowing the villa was not just at risk of being sold. It was at risk of being erased from the heart of a child who deserved better. The day after Grace's question lingered in my heart, I received an unexpected knock at the villa's front door. It was Daniel, the son of my late husband's closest friend. I had not seen him in years, but I remembered him as the boy who used to help us carry firewood during summers. Now he stood tall, wearing a simple suit, his briefcase in hand, his expression serious yet respectful. "Mrs. Hart," he began, "I am sorry to intrude, but I need to speak with you about something urgent." I invited him in, and we sat at the same kitchen table where Elise had placed the check. The air was heavy with memory, but Daniel's presence felt steady, almost like a bridge to the past. He opened his briefcase and pulled out several documents. "I was contacted," he explained, "by a colleague at the county office. He recognized your name on a property transfer file and thought something seemed off. He handed me the papers, and I immediately saw my signature. At first glance, it looked like mine. But as my eyes lingered, I noticed the slant was wrong. The loops on the letters were too tight. It was a forgery. My stomach tightened. Elise had not only betrayed me with her words, but with her pen. I traced the ink with my finger, cold realization sinking in. She had filed these papers as if I had willingly surrendered the villa. Daniel leaned forward, lowering his voice. "Mrs. Hart, if this goes through unchallenged, legally you will no longer own this property. It will be as if you never existed here." The phrase struck me harder than Elise's demand. As if I never existed here. Was that not what she had already implied with her check? That I was dispensable, removable, erasable? I asked him quietly, "What can be done?" "There are options," he said. "We can challenge the documents. We can argue forgery. But it will mean bringing Elise into court. It will mean exposing her actions publicly." The thought made my chest ache. To see my own daughter standing in front of a judge, accused of fraud, felt like a wound too deep to bear. I closed my eyes and pressed the handkerchief against my palm. My husband's memory seemed to whisper through it. "Protect what we built, but do not lose yourself." Daniel studied my silence. His tone softened. "My own mother went through something similar," he said. "Her brother tricked her into signing away her farmland. She was too ashamed to fight back. We lost everything." His eyes met mine firmly. "You do not have to let this happen." His words carried the weight of lived pain. For the first time, I saw Elise's betrayal reflected in someone else's story. The injustice was not mine alone. It was part of a pattern that too many women endured, sacrificing, only to be erased by those they trusted most. I wanted to scream. I wanted to cry. But instead, I sat still, letting silence do the speaking. My voice, when it came, was steady but low. If I fight, I betray my daughter. If I do nothing, I betray myself. Daniel did not interrupt. He simply waited, giving me the dignity of space. Finally, I said, "I need time." "Of course," he replied, standing. "But please, Do not wait too long. Once the papers are fully processed, it may be too late. He gathered his documents and left me with his card. When the door closed behind him, I remained at the table, staring at the forged signature. It was uncanny how closely it resembled mine, yet how utterly false it was. That false line carried the power to strip me of everything I had worked for, everything my husband and I had dreamed of. I poured myself a cup of tea, though it turned cold before I ever lifted it to my lips. The weight of choice pressed against me. To expose Elise was to risk shattering what little remained of our bond, yet to stay silent was to surrender the villa, to allow my life's work to vanish as if it had never mattered. I held the handkerchief tightly, the threads digging into my skin. The villa around me seemed to hold its breath, and I realized, for the first time, that silence could be both a shield and a weapon. The question was when and how I would choose to wield it. That night I walked the halls again, but this time, each creak of the floorboards sounded less like grief and more like a warning. The villa itself seemed to whisper, "Do not let yourself be erased." That night, I could not sleep. The villa, usually my sanctuary, felt like a restless body surrounding me. Each wall seemed to breathe. Each floorboard groaned beneath invisible weight. I lay awake, staring at the ceiling, Elise's forged signature burning in my mind. Daniel's words echoed, "Once the papers are processed, it may be too late." I rose from bed and wrapped my shawl around my shoulders. The moonlight filtered through the curtains, casting long silver lines across the floor. The villa seemed both familiar and strange, like a friend who suddenly carried a secret. I walked barefoot through the hallway, letting my fingers graze the walls. The texture of paint, the coolness of wood beneath my feet, reminded me that this place was more than a property. It was a map of my life. In the living room, I lit a small lamp. Its glow fell across the photographs on the mantel. Elise as a toddler with cake on her cheeks. My late husband holding her up in the air, pride written across his face. The three of us together on the villa's front steps. I picked up one frame and whispered, "We gave you everything. Did I fail you by loving you the wrong way?" The question lingered, unanswered. I placed the photo back carefully, almost as if it could shatter with the wrong touch. I drifted toward the kitchen. The table was still cluttered with yesterday's papers. The check Elise had left sat there like a thorn. $20,000 meant to erase me. I stared at it until the ink seemed to blur. I imagined myself taking it, imagined leaving quietly, as Elise wished. A small apartment somewhere, days passing without the sound of Grace's laughter or the scent of the sea outside these windows. I imagined shrinking into nothing. My heart recoiled. I poured water into the kettle and set it on the stove. The hiss of flame reminded me of years past, when my husband and I stayed up late, planning our future over cups of tea. He used to say, "One day, this villa will be Grace's inheritance. She will know where she came from." Now, that promise teetered on the edge of disappearance. When the water boiled, I poured it into my cup, but I did not drink. The steam curled upward, disappearing into the air, like everything Elise wanted me to become. I pressed the handkerchief against my cheek. Its threads smelled faintly of lavender soap, the same scent my husband favored. The touch steadied me, but it also ached. I wandered upstairs. Grace's drawings were still pinned to the corkboard in her room. Rainbows, stick figures, suns with smiling faces. In one, she had drawn the villa with hearts all around it. I touched the paper gently. Children do not draw lies. Their crayons reveal the truth adults hide from. The clock struck midnight. I sat by the window in my bedroom, looking out at the sea. Waves broke against the cliffs, steady and relentless. They had been breaking like that since long before me, and they would continue long after. It comforted me to know that some things endure, even when human loyalty falters. As the hours stretched, my thoughts spiraled between anger and sorrow. Elise's betrayal hurt, but beneath it, I sensed a deeper ache. Her need to prove herself, to grasp at wealth and recognition I never gave her. She had always felt overshadowed by the villa, by the memory of her father. And now she sought control, even if it meant erasing me. I whispered into the dark, "Elise, I was blind to your pain, but this I cannot accept." The villa groaned as the wind swept against its walls. I felt its voice, urging me to stand, to hold firm. Each creak of wood seemed to say, "You are still here. You are not gone." I stayed awake until the sky paled with dawn. My cup of tea sat untouched beside me, cold as stone. I pressed the handkerchief to my lips and made a silent vow. I would not leave. I would not vanish quietly. If Elise thought she could buy my silence, she had underestimated the woman who had built this life from nothing. The night had been long, and sleep never came. But when the first light touched the horizon, I felt something stir inside me. Not rage, not revenge. Something quieter, stronger. Resolve. The morning after my sleepless night, Elise returned. She did not call ahead, did not ask permission. The sharp knock at the villa's front door was not the knock of a daughter visiting her mother. It was the knock of someone who believed she owned the place. I opened the door, and there she was, standing tall in her tailored blazer, her lips pressed into a thin line. She carried a folder in her hand, thicker this time, stuffed with papers. She walked past me into the dining room as though she had every right, setting the folder on the table where the check still lay. Her eyes darted to the check, then back to me. "You still haven't cashed it?" I shook my head. Elise exhaled heavily, as if dealing with a stubborn child. "Mother, please. You are dragging this out longer than it needs to be. I have everything ready. All you need to do is sign." She opened the folder and slid a pen across the table toward me. I remained standing. My fingers brushed the edge of the chair, but I did not sit. Instead, I asked calmly, "Elise, tell me, if your father were alive, would you have the courage to do this in front of him?" Her hand froze. The pen she had been holding clattered softly against the papers. For a fleeting moment, I saw something crack in her polished facade. Her eyes flickered with something, fear, maybe, or shame. But it lasted only a breath before she straightened again. "Father is gone," she said quickly. "He would have wanted what was best for me, for us." "For us?" I repeated. "Or just for you?" She bit her lip. Her gaze slid to the window, avoiding mine. For years, Elise had been skilled at talking circles, convincing others of her logic. But this time, my silence unsettled her. I did not shout. I did not argue. I simply stood there, letting the weight of the question sink in. Finally, she spoke again, her tone sharper. "You're clinging to the past, Mother. This villa is too much for you. It's falling apart. Do you want to spend your last years patching roofs and fixing pipes? You deserve comfort. I'm giving you that chance." Comfort, I thought. To Elise, comfort meant erasing everything I had lived for. I walked slowly to the table, sat down across from her, and lifted the pen. She watched me closely, her lips curving in satisfaction. believing she had won. But instead of signing, I placed the pen gently back on the folder. I looked her in the eyes and asked, "Do you remember the night you had pneumonia when you were 7?" Her brows furrowed. "What does that have to do with anything?" I leaned back, the handkerchief warm in my palm. "You don't remember, but I sat awake for 3 nights straight. I carried you to the window to help you breathe. I prayed for your life with every breath you took. That villa, these walls, were not built just for me. They were built to hold you, to protect you. And now, you ask me to sign it away as if it were nothing." She shifted uncomfortably. Her voice grew defensive. "I'm not erasing memories, Mother. I'm securing a future built on betrayal," I replied softly. Her eyes widened, but I kept my tone calm. There was no anger, only truth. Elise searched my face, waiting for me to explode, to accuse, to scream. But I gave her nothing of the kind. My silence was heavier than any shout. Minutes passed. The clock ticked. At last, Elise snapped the folder shut. "Fine," she said, standing abruptly. "If you won't sign, then you're forcing me to handle this another way." I did not stop her. I did not plead. I only lifted the handkerchief to my lips and whispered, "Your father would weep if he saw this." She froze at the doorway, her back rigid, but she did not turn around. A moment later, the door slammed, echoing through the villa. I remained seated, staring at the folder she had left behind. My pulse was steady. For the first time, I felt the power of my silence. I had not given her the fight she expected. I had not surrendered either. I had simply stood my ground in the quietest way possible. And in that quiet, I realized Elise had underestimated me. She thought age made me weak. She thought grief made me soft. But what she forgot is that silence, when chosen, can carry the weight of a storm. That night, I slept little again. But instead of despair, I felt something new settle inside me. Resolve. The morning after Elise stormed out, I found myself sitting on the porch, watching the tide roll in. The sea was calm, deceptively calm, as though mocking the storm inside me. I held the handkerchief in my lap, smoothing its worn edges with my thumb. I was still trying to steady my breath when I heard footsteps approaching. It was Daniel again. He carried no briefcase this time, only a paper cup of coffee in each hand. He offered me one with a small smile. "You look like you didn't sleep," he said gently. I accepted the cup, though my hands trembled slightly as I lifted it. "No," I admitted. "Sleep avoids me these days." He sat on the step beside me, close enough to feel his steadiness, yet not so close as to intrude. For a while, we sipped in silence. Then he spoke. "You remind me of my mother." I turned to him, surprised. He nodded slowly. When my uncle tricked her into signing away the farm, she didn't scream, didn't fight, not the way people expected. She sat at the table with the papers in front of her, her eyes steady, her hands calm. The silence in her face scared me more than any shouting could have. My throat tightened. What happened to her? "We lost the land," he said simply. She couldn't bring herself to drag her brother into court. It broke her. She lived the rest of her days in a rented house, surrounded by things that never felt like ours. He looked out toward the sea. I promised myself I'd never let that happen to someone else if I could help it. That's why I became a lawyer. His story pierced me. In his mother's silence, I saw myself. In her loss, I saw the future Elise wanted to write for me. My fingers clutched the handkerchief harder, the threads digging into my palm. Daniel looked at me, his gaze steady. "You still have time, Mrs. Hart. You don't have to lose everything." I took a long breath. "Elise is my daughter," I said finally. "If I fight her, I break her. If I let this go, she erases me. Which wound is greater?" He considered my words carefully. Sometimes protecting someone means telling them no, even if they hate you for it. The sentence hung between us, heavy with truth. I thought of Elise as a little girl, begging for a second slice of cake, begging for permission to stay out late, begging for choices I often denied because I thought I was protecting her. And now, here I was, hesitating to protect myself because I feared breaking her. Daniel must have sensed my turmoil. He reached into his pocket and pulled out a folded photograph. It was of his mother, standing in front of their old farmhouse, her smile tired but resilient. "I carry this to remind me," he said, "of what silence can cost if it's not chosen, but forced." I studied the photograph carefully. His mother's eyes told a story of sacrifice without reward. I saw dignity, but also regret. She had given everything and received nothing in return. The villa walls behind me seemed to close in tighter. For the first time, I spoke words I had been afraid to admit aloud. "I'm afraid, Daniel. Not of losing the villa, not even of poverty. I'm afraid of becoming invisible." He did not flinch. "That fear is real," he said softly. "But you are not invisible to me, nor to Grace, nor, I suspect, to Elise, even if she pretends otherwise." Something in his words softened me, yet also strengthened me. The reflection of his mother's story was like a mirror held up to my own. I could see where the path of surrender led, and I knew I could not walk it. We sat there until the coffee grew cold, the morning sun warming our shoulders. When Daniel finally rose to leave, he placed a hand briefly on mine. "Whatever you decide, Mrs. Hart, make sure it's your decision, not hers." After he left, I remained on the porch, staring at the waves. My reflection had been given to me through another woman's story, through the pain of a son who had watched his mother disappear. And in that reflection, I saw my own outline, fragile yet unbroken. The handkerchief lay in my lap, but for the first time, it did not feel heavy. It felt like an anchor, a reminder that silence could be chosen with dignity, not imposed with cruelty. That morning, I realized something profound. Elise might try to erase me, but I still had the power to choose whether or not I allowed myself to fade. A few days later, Elise returned, but this time, she did not bring folders or checks. She came alone, without her polished armor of business attire. She stood at the doorway, uncertain, as if debating whether to knock or to turn away. When I opened the door, I noticed her eyes were red, not from anger, but from exhaustion. "Mother," she said quietly, "may I come in?" I nodded and stepped aside. She walked into the living room and sank into the armchair opposite me. For a long while, she said, "Nothing." She stared at her hands, twisting her wedding band back and forth. The silence between us stretched, not heavy this time, but raw. Finally, her voice broke through, softer than I had heard in years. "Do you even know what it felt like growing up in this house?" I blinked, startled. Elise had never spoken of her childhood in such a way. She pressed on, her words tumbling faster, almost frantic. Every corner of this villa was about him. Father's books, father's trophies, father's tools. Even the stories you told at dinner, always about what he built, how strong he was, how much he gave up. I was proud of him too, Mother. But where was I in any of it? Where was my voice? Her confession pierced me deeper than the forged signature. I listened as she continued, her voice thick with years of resentment. When I tried to paint, you told me to focus on school. When I wanted to move to the city, you said it was foolish, unsafe. I lived in the shadow of this villa, in the shadow of him, and in the shadow of you. And now, I just wanted something that was mine. I sat frozen, the handkerchief pressed tightly against my palm. Memories flooded back. The nights I scolded her for wasting time on sketchbooks. The times I told her dreams could wait. I had thought I was protecting her, shaping her into someone practical, someone who would never struggle the way I had. But I realize now that my protection had felt like erasure. Elise's eyes glistened as she looked at me. Selling the villa wasn't just about money, Mother. It was about finally stepping out from under its weight, about proving I could make decisions without your voice correcting me. For a moment, I wanted to argue, to defend myself, to explain that everything I did was out of love. But the words caught in my throat, because beneath her bitterness, I heard the truth of her pain. And pain does not vanish when you deny it. I whispered instead, Elise, I never meant to silence you. Her laugh was short, bitter. But you did. You just never noticed. The room fell quiet again, except for the ticking clock on the mantel. I stared at the photographs on the wall, images of birthdays, holidays, family dinners. I had thought they were proof of love. But perhaps to her, they were reminders of absence, of a voice she could never raise above mine. I closed my eyes, and in that darkness, I saw the outlines of my mistakes. Love is not always enough when it blinds you to another's needs. I had loved Elise fiercely, but I had not seen her fully. When I opened my eyes, she was watching me carefully, waiting for me to respond. My voice was quiet, almost fragile. You felt invisible, didn't you? Her chin trembled, but she nodded. All my life. I wanted to reach for her, but my hand stayed folded in my lap. The distance between us felt too wide, a canyon carved by years of silence, misunderstandings, and unspoken wounds. Yet even in that distance, I felt something shift. Elise's confession was not an excuse for her betrayal, but it was a window into the heart of it. She was not only greedy, she was wounded. She had been carrying this wound for years, and in her desperation to heal, she had chosen the wrong path. I whispered, more to myself than to her. Pain passed down becomes pain repeated. If I cannot see her wound, I will pass mine to her. Elise stood abruptly, wiping her eyes. She muttered, I shouldn't have come, and moved toward the door. But before leaving, she turned back, her voice breaking. You think I'm cruel, Mother, but you never saw the nights I lay awake wishing you would notice me. Not just him, not just this villa. Me. And then she was gone, leaving me with words that would echo long into the night. I sat in the armchair long after, the handkerchief clutched tightly, tears pressing against my eyes but refusing to fall. For the first time, I saw Elise not only as my betrayer, but as my child, still reaching for a love she believed she never fully received. The villa seemed to sigh around me. Its walls had carried both pride and pain. And in that moment, I wondered if healing between us was possible, or if the wound had grown too deep. 2 evenings after Elise's confession, she called me. Her voice was carefully controlled, no longer trembling with the rawness I had seen before. Mother, let's have dinner together. At Lamberti's, 7 o'clock. Lamberti's was one of the most expensive restaurants in town, a place my husband and I had only passed by, but never entered. It seemed Elise wanted to stage a performance on polished marble floors, under crystal chandeliers. For a moment, I almost said no. But then I realized I needed to see her in her chosen setting, to watch the script she was about to play out. So I agreed. When I arrived, the maitre d' guided me to a table near the center of the dining room. Elise was already there, sitting upright, dressed in a sleek navy dress that spoke of confidence and money. She stood when she saw me, kissing my cheek lightly, almost as if she were greeting a business partner. I noticed immediately that she had ordered wine. 2 glasses sat waiting, the ruby liquid catching the golden light. She gestured for me to sit, her smile practiced, her tone warm but rehearsed. "Mother, I'm glad you came. I know things have been tense, but tonight, I want us to enjoy ourselves." I sat across from her, the handkerchief hidden in my pocket, my anchor. I nodded, but I said little. The waiter appeared, listing specials with elegant precision. Elise ordered quickly, confidently. She knew exactly what she wanted, what impression she hoped to create. When the waiter left, she leaned forward, lowering her voice as though we were conspirators. "Mother, I think you'll be relieved once I explain everything. Selling the villa wasn't just about me. It was about creating a future where neither of us has to worry. I've already put part of the money into an investment. The returns will be incredible. Imagine it. You can live comfortably without stress, without maintenance, without burdens." I let her words flow over me like water, watching her face rather than listening to the promises. She was glowing with excitement, her eyes shining in a way that almost reminded me of the little girl who once showed me her first painting. Only this time, the canvas she displayed was money. I lifted my glass of water, sipped slowly, and asked, "And where do I belong in this future of yours?" She laughed lightly, waving her hand. "Mother, you belong wherever you want. You'll have freedom. Isn't that what you've always wanted? To be free of responsibility?" Her words stung. Freedom, as she called it, was simply absence, dressed up as a gift. I set my glass down carefully, letting the silence linger. Elise's smile faltered, but only slightly. She rushed on. "I know it feels sudden, but you'll see. It's the smartest choice. People my age don't wait around. We act. That's why I'll succeed." I watched her, noting the pride in her tone, the way she leaned into her own certainty. Yet beneath that certainty, I saw desperation, as if she were clinging to the belief that this gamble would finally fill the emptiness she had confessed to me days before. I folded my hands in my lap, fingers brushing the handkerchief. My husband's voice echoed in my memory. "Never confuse noise for strength." Elise was loud tonight, but her noise betrayed her fragility. The food arrived, plates of lamb, roasted vegetables, delicate sauces. I picked at mine quietly, while Elise talked about future projects, potential profits, homes she might buy, vacations she could finally take. Each word pulled her further from the villa, further from me. At one point, Grace's name slipped into the conversation. Elise spoke of private schools, elite programs, polished futures. I asked, softly, "Does Grace know she won't play in the villa garden anymore?" Elise stiffened. She looked down, cutting into her lamb with precision. "Children adapt. She'll understand." But her voice cracked, betraying her. I let the silence sit between us, heavier than the food on our plates. Elise filled it quickly, her words faster now, as if trying to convince not just me, but herself. "Mother, tonight is about celebration. You'll see soon enough. This is the best path." Trust me." I leaned back in my chair, letting her finish her performance. In her eyes, I saw both the child still craving my recognition and the woman determined to claim her independence, no matter the cost. I did not argue. I did not scold. My silence unsettled her more than anger ever could. The dinner stretched on, polished and rehearsed. But beneath the surface, I felt the fracture widening. This was not reconciliation. This was Elise trying to script a victory. And I, sitting quietly with my handkerchief in my pocket, knew the performance was only beginning. The clink of silverware against porcelain filled the silence that stretched between us. Elise talked quickly, her words running faster than the wine in her glass. She painted pictures of luxury apartments, investments already blossoming, a life where she would never again feel small. I watched her, steady and silent, letting her fill the space with noise. Her voice carried the same brightness she had used as a child when showing me a test she aced, eager for approval. But tonight, the brightness was strained. Beneath it, I sensed fear. I finally set down my fork, folded my hands in my lap, and asked gently, "Elise, tell me, do you believe happiness can be bought with the same pen that erases your mother?" Her knife froze mid-cut. She glanced up, eyes flashing with irritation. "Mother, please, don't dramatize this. It's not about erasing you. It's about moving forward. Moving forward without me," I said softly. She opened her mouth, but no words came. For a long moment, she looked at me as though searching for the child she once knew, the mother who once protected her. Then, with a sharp breath, she reached for her glass again. The wine trembled slightly as she lifted it. "You never understood," she said finally, her tone harder now. "You built your whole life around that villa, you and father. But where did that leave me? Always waiting, always second place. I'm done waiting." The words cut, but they were not new. They were echoes of the wound she had shown me days before. I felt the weight of them, but I did not let them pull me down. I breathed slowly, letting silence answer. The waiter returned with dessert menus, oblivious to the storm at our table. Elise waved him away, sharply. "Not now." Her voice cracked as she snapped, drawing a few curious glances from other diners. Her cheeks flushed. She smoothed her hair quickly, regaining composure. I reached into my pocket, fingers curling around the handkerchief. Its threads steadied me. When I spoke, my tone was calm, almost tender. "Elise, I hear your pain, but selling what we built together will not heal it. It will only carve it deeper." She shook her head furiously, her eyes bright with unshed tears. "You don't understand. This is my chance to finally be seen, to prove I'm not invisible." And in that moment, Grace's small voice pierced the tension. She had come with us to dinner, quiet until now, coloring on the children's menu. She looked up, innocence radiating from her wide eyes. "Mommy, does this mean I can't play at Grandma's house anymore?" The dining room seemed to hush. Elise stiffened, her hand tightening around the stem of her glass. She forced a smile at Grace, but it wavered. "Of course you'll still see Grandma, sweetheart. We'll visit." But Grace's brow furrowed. "Visit? But it's our home." She glanced at me for reassurance, and my heart clenched. I reached across the table, resting my hand lightly on Grace's. "Yes, darling, it is your home. Always." Elise slammed her glass down harder than she intended. Wine sloshed over the rim, staining the white tablecloth. A hush fell around us as diners looked our way. Elise's face burned crimson. She hissed, "Mother, don't fill her head with lies." The silence that followed was deafening. I kept my gaze on Grace, smoothing her hair gently, as though Elise's outburst had not happened. Elise's breath came fast, shallow. She realized the eyes of the room were on her. Her mask of composure had cracked. She sat back, forcing a brittle laugh. "I'm sorry," she said too loudly. "Just a family disagreement. Nothing more." But everyone could see it. The polished woman with her perfect dress and expensive wine had lost control. The image she clung to had shattered in one careless moment. I lifted my napkin, dabbing at the spilled wine, and whispered, "Sometimes truth spills out no matter how tightly we hold the glass." Elise froze, her eyes locking on mine. For the first time, I saw fear, not of me, but of herself, of the reflection she could no longer hide. The rest of dinner dragged on in strained silence. Grace leaned against my side, drowsy, her trust in me stronger than ever. Elise picked at her dessert, her appetite gone. The sparkle of triumph she had carried when the evening began was gone too. When we finally rose to leave, Elise walked ahead quickly, her heels striking the marble like the echo of defeat. I followed slowly, Grace's small hand in mine, the handkerchief pressed firmly against my palm. At the door, I glanced back once at the empty table. The wine stain remained, a dark bloom against white linen, impossible to hide. And I knew. It was not just the tablecloth that had been marked. Something inside Elise had cracked open, and no performance could seal it shut again. The night at Lamberti's ended with silence in the car. Elise gripped the steering wheel tightly, her jaw clenched, her eyes fixed forward. Grace slept in the back seat, her head resting against the window, unaware of the storm she had witnessed at the table. I said nothing. My silence filled the car like a second passenger. One Elise could not escape. When we reached the villa, she dropped me off without looking at me. The headlights faded into the distance, leaving me alone in the dark. The next morning, I sat on the porch, the handkerchief in my hand, the memory of the spilled wine still fresh in my mind. The stain on the tablecloth had felt like a prophecy, a mark that no matter how much Elise tried to polish her story, the truth would seep through. That was when I saw Daniel approaching again, but this time he was not in his usual quiet demeanor. He carried a leather folder under his arm, his pace steady but urgent. He greeted me politely, but his eyes carried weight. "Mrs. Hart, we need to talk." I led him inside, into the living room where the morning light fell across the old rug. He placed the folder on the coffee table and opened it, spreading papers across the surface. His voice was calm, but firm. "I'm afraid things are moving faster than I thought. Your daughter has already submitted secondary filings. She's pushing to finalize the transfer of ownership." My stomach turned. I stared at the papers. Cold, legal, precise. The ink of my forged signature glared back at me. Daniel leaned forward. "There's something you need to understand. Once this process completes, not even a lawsuit can easily undo it. It will take years, maybe longer. And in the meantime, you'll be stripped of all authority over the villa." I sat back in my chair, pressing the handkerchief to my chest. My breath grew shallow, but my voice was steady. "She thinks she can erase me with paper." Daniel's eyes met mine. "She can, if you let her." The room fell silent. The clock ticked steadily, filling the space where my thoughts swirled. I looked around the villa, at the photographs, the books, the walls my husband had painted. I thought of Grace's drawing folded carefully in my pocket upstairs. Finally, I whispered, "If I fight her, I drag my daughter into court. What mother does that?" Daniel did not look away. A mother who knows her worth. A mother who protects the truth. I felt his words like a stone dropped into still water, rippling outward. For so long, I had believed that love meant sacrifice, even if it meant sacrificing myself. But Daniel's voice reminded me that love without boundaries becomes erasure. I asked quietly, "What happens if I don't fight?" He hesitated, then answered honestly, "You'll lose everything. The villa will no longer belong to you. And when Grace is grown, all she'll know is that her mother took it, and her grandmother stayed silent." The words struck me harder than any wound Elise had given me. Grace. This was not just about me or even Elise. It was about the memory Grace would carry forward. Would she remember me as the woman who surrendered, or the woman who stood? I closed my eyes, letting the silence stretch. When I opened them, Daniel was still watching, patient but unwavering. He slid another paper across the table. It was not a court filing, but a trust agreement, an irrevocable trust, already prepared. "I've drafted this for you," he explained. "If you sign, the villa moves into the trust immediately. Elise cannot touch it, no matter what she files. It becomes untouchable, preserved for Grace, or whoever you choose." I traced the paper with my fingertips, the weight of decision pressed against me. To sign meant protection, but also confrontation. Elise would know she had lost control. The fracture between us would deepen, perhaps beyond repair. Daniel must have read my hesitation. He softened his voice. "Mrs. Hart, I know this isn't just property. It's family. But sometimes the only way to save a family is to protect what cannot speak for itself. This villa carries more than bricks. It carries history." I stared at the handkerchief in my lap. Its fabric was thin, worn, but still intact. Much like me, much like this home. Quietly, I whispered, "Elise has no idea what I've already done." Daniel leaned back, his expression unreadable. But I saw something flicker in his eyes. Respect, perhaps even relief. He knew, as I did, that the first step had already been taken. We sat in silence a moment longer. Outside, the sea crashed against the cliffs, steady and relentless. And in that rhythm, I felt my own resolve solidify. Elise could storm. She could rage. She could try to erase me with ink. But she had underestimated the strength of silence and the quiet power of truth. When Daniel left, the villa seemed lighter, as though the walls themselves had exhaled. I folded the papers carefully, placed the handkerchief on top, and whispered to the empty room, "This is not the end. This is the beginning." The morning after Daniel left, I found myself walking through the villa with new eyes. Every corner seemed to whisper its history. Every photograph seemed to testify to the years I had poured into this place. I touched the wooden banister that my husband had sanded smooth decades ago. I lingered by the window where Grace had once drawn hearts in the condensation. These weren't just memories. They were evidence. Silent, irrefutable proof that this villa had always been more than property. It was a living archive of a life built with sacrifice. Daniel returned later that afternoon. He carried another folder, heavier this time, his face grave but determined. He set it on the table and began pulling out photographs, documents, and printed transcripts. He said softly, "We have more than just forged papers now. We have her words." I frowned, unsure what he meant. Daniel explained that weeks earlier, he had suspected Elise's intentions might turn darker. Out of precaution, he had placed a security measure in place. He reached for a small recording device and pressed play. At first, all I heard was static. Then Elise's voice, sharp and cold, filled the room. She's too sentimental to fight me. By the time she realizes what happened, the papers will already be filed. I'll tell her it's for her own good, that she's too old to keep living there. And if she protests, I'll say she's not well enough to understand. Who would believe her over me? The words pierced me deeper than any blade could. My own daughter, plotting with such certainty, reducing me to a shadow of myself. I closed my eyes, letting the betrayal wash over me in waves. But Daniel's voice cut through the ache. This is what they call financial abuse of elders. And now, we have the proof. I opened my eyes slowly, staring at the small device on the table. Elise's voice still rang in my ears, echoing through the silence. For a moment, I could barely breathe. I whispered almost to myself, "She sounds so sure I would remain quiet." Daniel looked at me steadily. "Because silence has been your shield, but now it has to be your sword." We went through the documents together. Copies of Elise's filings, side by side with notarized statements from my past signatures. The differences were unmistakable. He showed me photographs. Elise in a notary's office with a man we didn't recognize, smiling as though she were the rightful owner of the villa. He showed me bank transfers, deposits that did not align with her income, money moving quickly through accounts that smelled of desperation. Piece by piece, the picture assembled itself. Elise hadn't just betrayed me emotionally. She had built a web of deceit that threatened to strangle everything I had worked for. Still, my heart warred within me. As Daniel spoke of affidavits and criminal statutes, I thought of Elise as a child. Her curls bouncing in the sunlight, her laughter ringing in the kitchen. I thought of the first time she held Grace, her voice trembling with awe. How could that same daughter now speak of me as if I were disposable? I felt the moral conflict rise inside me. If I pursued this, Elise would face consequences that could not be undone. Courtrooms, investigators, perhaps even handcuffs. Could I bear to see my daughter reduced to that? Sensing my hesitation, Daniel placed a hand gently on the folder. "I know this is unbearable, but think of Grace. Think of what she learns if Elise succeeds. That betrayal carries no cost, that a grandmother's silence can erase 40 years of truth. Is that the legacy you want for her?" His words struck deep. I realized this wasn't only about saving the villa. It was about saving the story of my life from being rewritten by someone else's ambition. Elise wanted to paint me as fragile, irrelevant, senile even. If I stayed silent, I would become exactly what she described. I leaned back in my chair, clutching the handkerchief in my palm. Its fabric was worn, but it endured. Just like me. I whispered, "I won't let her erase me." Daniel nodded firmly. "Then we'll act. I'll file for an injunction tomorrow. But I need you to be ready. This will not be quiet. She will come at you harder once she realizes she's losing control." I drew in a slow breath. For years, I had avoided conflict, believing that peace came from silence. But now I understood. Silence could also be complicity. My strength lay not in shouting, but in knowing when to speak with precision. And the time to speak had come. As Daniel gathered the documents back into his folder, I felt a shift inside me. The villa was no longer just a home. It had become a battlefield. The evidence we held was my armor. The truth was my ally. When Daniel left, I sat alone in the living room, the weight of what lay ahead pressing on me. Yet, beneath the heaviness, there was something new, an ember of resolve glowing quietly. Elise believed I was too old to fight. She believed I would fade into the background. She had no idea that my silence had been preparing me for this very moment. I looked around the room once more, at the photographs and the walls that had carried our history, and I whispered to them, as though they could hear, "You are my witnesses. You will not be taken." The evidence was gathered. The stage was set. The next move would not be hers. It would be mine. The days after Daniel showed me the evidence moved like a slow tide, steady and heavy, each hour pulling me deeper into waters I had spent a lifetime avoiding. I knew Elise would come. Her silence was never stillness. It was calculation. And sure enough, 2 evenings later, she arrived unannounced, her car pulling into the gravel drive with the sharpness of someone who wanted to control the ground before her feet touched it. I opened the door before she knocked. She looked startled, almost caught off guard, as if she had expected me to retreat into shadows. Instead, I stood waiting. Her eyes flicked to the handkerchief in my hand, the same one I carried everywhere now, and something about it seemed to irritate her. "Mother," she began, her voice smooth, practiced. "I've been thinking about our dinner the other night. Perhaps I was too harsh." Her words hung in the air, like perfume sprayed to mask a deeper odor. I let her in, and she walked straight to the parlor, seating herself in the armchair as though it already belonged to her. I followed slowly, taking my place on the sofa across from her. She crossed her legs, adjusted her blouse, and finally spoke again. "The truth is, I've been under a lot of pressure. The villa is valuable, yes, but so much of it is wasted potential. I only wanted to make it thrive, to give Grace something greater than an old house by the sea." I kept my face still, but inside, my heart tugged. I wanted to believe her, to believe there was more than greed, more than dismissal behind her actions. "So you sold it," I said quietly, "without asking me, without even considering what 40 years of work meant to me." Elise's face flickered with something I couldn't place. Defensiveness, perhaps even guilt. "I didn't sell it, Mother. Not really. The papers, they're just a step. Nothing final yet." A half-truth. She was trying to soften the blow, to give me fragments of honesty laced with excuses. I looked at her and asked, "Then why forge my name? Why not sit with me and tell me what you wanted?" Her eyes darted away, just for a moment, before she answered, "Because you never listen. Every time I suggested something, you clung to the past. You never trusted me to make decisions. I thought, if I did it first and showed you the benefits later, you'd understand." Her confession struck me like a bruise pressed too hard. For the first time, she let a truth slip. Her resentment, her belief that I had caged her beneath my silence. I wanted to protest, to remind her of all the times I had supported her choices, of the sacrifices made so she could study, marry, fail, and still return home. But I stopped myself. This was not the moment to argue history. This was the moment to listen to what was buried beneath her actions. "You thought deception would make me understand?" I asked softly. She shifted uncomfortably, her polished facade beginning to crack. "I thought results would matter more than methods. I thought once you saw the profit, you'd forgive the process." I leaned forward, resting the handkerchief on my lap. My voice was steady, but it trembled beneath with grief. "Elise, do you hear yourself? You speak as though I am a shareholder in a company, not your mother. You speak of profit when what I built was a life. Do you know what that villa holds? Not just money. It holds your father's sweat, my years of labor, the echo of every dinner, every storm survived, every song Grace hummed in the hallways. And you reduce it to numbers on a page. For a moment, her eyes glistened, as if my words pierced through her armor. She opened her mouth, then closed it, as if unsure whether to defend or to surrender. Finally, she whispered, I didn't mean to erase you. I just wanted to step out from under you. There it was, the half-confession, the fractured truth. She was not ready to admit her full betrayal, but she had cracked open enough for me to glimpse the wound beneath her cruelty. It was not just greed. It was hunger. Hunger for recognition, for independence, for a validation she believed I had withheld. I sat back, breathing slowly, letting silence fill the room. Silence that was heavier than any scolding, sharper than any accusation. Elise fidgeted under its weight, finally breaking eye contact. You think I'm a monster, she muttered. No, I said quietly. I think you're my daughter, and that makes this the deepest cut of all. The words fell between us, undeniable, irrevocable. She shifted again, as though she wanted to reach for me, but her pride pulled her hand back. Maybe I went too far, she admitted, her voice barely audible. But it's not as bad as you think. We can fix this, Mother. Together. But I knew the truth she wasn't ready to say aloud. It was exactly as bad as I thought. Worse, perhaps. The recordings, the filings, the calculated words spoken in Daniel's evidence. They told a story she could not wash away with half remorse. I stood slowly, my body heavy but resolute. I will not argue with you tonight, I told her. But know this. Silence is not weakness. I have been silent because I trusted. Now I know better. Her face fell, the mask slipping for just a second, revealing fear beneath the arrogance. She stood too, smoothing her blouse, regaining her composure. You'll see, she said quickly, as though convincing herself. You'll see I was right. I did not answer. I simply opened the door and waited. The silence between us was louder than any scream. She left without another word, her heels clicking on the stone path, fading into the night. When the door closed, I pressed the handkerchief to my lips, my breath trembling. It was a half-confession, nothing more. Enough to remind me she was still human, still my daughter. But also enough to know she had chosen her path, and I would have to choose mine. The night after Elise's half-confession, I sat alone in the kitchen with a single lamp casting shadows across the tiled floor. The villa was quiet, except for the faint hum of the refrigerator, the same one my husband had bought decades ago. I poured myself tea, the steam rising, and let my thoughts circle like restless birds. I felt torn in two directions: the mother who wanted to forgive, and the woman who had been betrayed. Daniel's words replayed in my head. Silence has been your shield, but now it has to be your sword. I thought of Elise's face when she whispered, maybe I went too far. For a brief moment, she had looked like the little girl I once cradled, afraid and unsure. But almost in the same breath, she had defended her deceit, promising that I would see she was right. I wondered, if I pushed this forward in court, what would happen to her? Would she lose everything? Would Grace lose her mother to shame and consequences? And yet, if I did nothing, what would Grace learn? That betrayal could be covered with half apologies? That love meant surrendering your own dignity for the sake of appearances? As I sat there, Elise's words gnawed at me. You never trusted me to make decisions. Had I been too rigid, too unwilling to let her step into responsibility? I remembered times she had come to me with ideas, most of them careless, impulsive. But perhaps I had dismissed them too quickly. The guilt mixed with the anger, leaving me unsettled. That was when the phone rang. I startled, the sound breaking the fragile stillness. It was Daniel. His tone was calm, but urgent. "Mrs. Hart, I need to tell you something." Elise reached out to the county clerk again. "She's accelerating her filings. If we don't act soon, the injunction might not hold everything." I thanked him, but after hanging up, I sat motionless for several minutes. Elise was pushing harder. Even after her half-admission, she was moving forward, convinced she had the right to reshape our lives without my consent. The tea had gone cold in my hands when I finally whispered aloud to the empty kitchen, "What kind of mother drags her own child into court?" My voice cracked at the sound of the question. The silence that followed seemed to answer me. What kind of mother allows herself to be erased? Later that week, Grace came to visit. She carried a notebook filled with her drawings, sketches of trees, waves, and little houses that looked suspiciously like the villa. She asked, "Grandma, are you sad?" Her question was simple, but it struck like lightning. I pulled her into my lap and smoothed her hair. Sometimes, Grace, even people we love make choices that hurt us. And we have to decide what is right, even when it's hard. She looked up at me with wide, serious eyes. "Like when you told me not to lie, even if it makes people angry?" "Yes," I whispered, holding her close. Her innocence mirrored my moral conflict, and I realized children often see truths we try to hide from ourselves. That evening, after Grace left, I walked into the parlor where the evidence Daniel had given me still sat in a neat folder. I spread the papers across the table once more, examining them with a heavy heart. The forged signatures, the transcripts of Elise's words, the bank transfers. Each page was a wound, but also a warning. I tried to imagine explaining to a judge why I had chosen to stay silent. The image of Elise standing in court, her voice dripping with false concern. "My mother isn't well. She doesn't know what she's doing," haunted me. If I did not fight, I would be complicit in my own erasure. And yet, the other voice inside me whispered, "She is still your daughter. You know her wounds, even if she refuses to speak them. You know she acts out of hunger for recognition, for freedom from your shadow. Could I condemn her fully, knowing the emptiness driving her?" The moral conflict deepened, heavy as stone. Justice demanded action. Love pleaded for mercy. I took the handkerchief from my pocket and unfolded it on the table. Its threads were thinning, its edges frayed, yet it endured, just as I had. I realized then that endurance was not the same as silence. Sometimes endurance meant standing firm, not for vengeance, but for truth. I whispered to the handkerchief as if it could hear me. "I will not destroy her, but I will not let her destroy me." The decision was not yet final, but the path had begun to clear. I would fight, not with venom, but with clarity. Not to ruin my daughter, but to remind her that choices carry weight, that love without respect is not love at all. The tea sat untouched on the table, now completely cold. I poured it out, rinsed the cup, and placed it back in the cupboard. A small act, but symbolic. I would not swallow what was bitter anymore. Not for Elise, not for anyone. The night grew deeper, and I sat once more in the parlor, surrounded by evidence, by silence, and by the echoes of questions no mother ever wants to ask. Perhaps I would never find a perfect answer. But I knew this. Doing nothing was no longer an option. For days, I carried the weight of two voices inside me, one pleading for mercy, the other demanding justice. Each morning, I walked through the villa, listening to the sea crash against the cliffs, trying to hear which voice spoke louder. Elise's shadow lingered in every room, but so did Grace's laughter. I knew that whichever decision I made would shape not only my future, but hers. One morning, as the sun stretched over the horizon, I sat at the old oak table where my husband and I had once planned our lives. The same table where Elise had placed the forged papers weeks earlier. I laid out the documents Daniel had prepared, the injunction, the trust agreement, the affidavits, and beside them, the handkerchief I had carried through every storm. Its fabric was thin now, almost translucent, yet it had endured. I realized that was my answer. I would endure, but I would not surrender. I whispered aloud, as if confessing to the walls, I will not allow Elise to take this villa. Not from me, not from Grace, not from the memory of the man who built it with me. The decision did not come with anger, but with a calm clarity, like a tide receding to reveal the rocks beneath. Love did not mean enabling Elise's betrayal. Love meant showing her that choices had consequences, even when those choices were made by a daughter. That afternoon, I called Daniel. My voice was steady, though my hands trembled as I gripped the phone. File everything, I told him. All of it. The injunction, the trust, the evidence. I want this protected, no matter the cost. There was a pause. Then Daniel said, You're certain? I am, I answered. I've spent my life protecting everyone else. This time, I must protect myself. When I hung up, I felt a strange lightness in my chest, as though a burden I had carried in silence had finally been laid down. Yet the weight of grief remained. By protecting the villa, I was also acknowledging that Elise and I might never recover what had been lost between us. That evening, Elise came again, uninvited. Her footsteps on the porch echoed sharp against the night air. I opened the door, and she stood there with fire in her eyes. I know what you've done, she said coldly. I didn't flinch, and I know what you tried to do. She stepped inside without waiting for permission. Mother, do you realize what this means? You've made me your enemy. You've chosen paperwork over your own daughter. Her words cut deep, but I kept my voice calm. No, Elise, I've chosen truth. You turned yourself into an enemy when you forged my name and tried to erase my life. This villa was never just property. It was the sum of every sacrifice, every dream, every night your father and I spent building something out of nothing. And you tried to trade it for profit. For a moment, I saw her falter, her bravado slipping into something almost like shame. But pride reclaimed her quickly. You'll regret this, she snapped. You'll die alone in this house, clinging to walls and memories. And when you're gone, no one will remember your stubbornness, only that you wasted what could have been more. I let her words hang in the air, then replied softly, If solitude is the price of integrity, I will pay it. But I will not live erased, Elise. Not for you, not for anyone. The silence that followed was heavier than any scream. Elise's face hardened, but her eyes glistened as if something in her had cracked. She turned abruptly, storming out the door, her heels striking the porch like gavel blows. When the door closed, I sat back down at the oak table. The handkerchief lay folded neatly beside the documents. I touched it gently, whispering, This is my choice, my line in the sand. That night, I couldn't sleep. I walked through the villa in darkness, listening to the creaks of the old wood, the hush of the waves outside. Instead of sorrow, I felt a quiet resolve. Elise had forced me into a corner, but from that corner I had chosen to stand, not to collapse. Near midnight, Grace's drawing slipped out from my book, a sketch of the villa under the sun, with stick figures holding hands in front of it. She had drawn 3 figures: herself, me, and Elise. My chest ached at the sight, but also steadied me. The fight was not just for me. It was for the child who still believed in a family whole. As I placed the drawing back, I whispered, "Grace, someday you will know. You will understand why I chose this path." The next morning, the sea air felt sharper, fresher, as though the villa itself had been unshackled. Daniel called to confirm the filings were complete. The trust was sealed, the injunction in place. Elise could push, rage, threaten, but the law now stood beside me. My decision had been made. The path ahead would not be easy, but it was mine. For the first time in years, I felt not like a relic waiting to be discarded, but a woman reclaiming her place. I stood on the balcony, the sun rising over the cliffs, and breathed deeply. I was Vivian Hart, 68 years old, widow, mother, grandmother, keeper of a villa built from love and labor. And I had chosen to fight, not with fury, but with truth. The day the court papers reached Elise, the air in the villa grew heavier, as though the sea itself had turned storm against us. I did not see her receive them, but I heard about it through Daniel. He called that morning, his voice steady, but tinged with something close to pity. She was served yesterday. From what I gather, she didn't take it quietly. I thanked him, though my heart was already bracing. I knew Elise. Rage was her shield, and humiliation her deepest wound. She would not retreat gracefully. By evening, the storm arrived in the form of pounding fists on the front door. When I opened it, Elise stood there, her hair disheveled, her face streaked with tears and fury. "How could you?" she shouted before I even spoke. "How could you drag your own daughter into court like some criminal?" I stepped aside, allowing her in. I would not have her screaming on the porch for the neighbors to hear. She stormed past me into the parlor, her eyes darting around as if the walls themselves had betrayed her. "Do you have any idea what you've done? People are talking. Grace's school called. Do you want your granddaughter to grow up ashamed of her own family?" Her words struck deep, but I forced my voice to remain calm. "No, Elise. I want her to grow up, knowing that love is not a license for betrayal. That family is built on trust, not theft." She laughed bitterly, though the sound was closer to a sob. "Trust? You never trusted me. You smothered me, doubted me, treated me like a child, and now you've humiliated me in front of everyone. Congratulations, Mother. You finally won." Her body shook as she collapsed into a chair. For the first time, I saw her not as the aggressor, but as a woman cornered by the consequences of her own choices. Her voice cracked. "Do you know what they're saying? That I'm greedy, that I'm unstable, that I stole from my own mother. Do you know how it feels to walk into a room and see pity in every pair of eyes?" I wanted to tell her that I knew that feeling well, that I had carried the weight of whispers, the sting of condescension, for years as a widow raising a child alone. But I stayed silent. Sometimes silence says more than comfort ever could. She buried her face in her hands, muffling her words. I just wanted something of my own. I was so tired of being in your shadow. Every time people saw me, they saw your daughter, not Elise. I thought if I took control of the villa, if I made it bigger, more profitable, then maybe I'd finally be seen. The honesty in her voice startled me. For all her cruelty, all her scheming, she had finally spoken from the wound itself. I felt the ache of it settle in my chest. She wanted recognition, not just money. She wanted to step out from under my history, but in reaching for it, she had chosen deceit. Elise, I said softly, I never wanted you to live in my shadow. The villa was never meant to cage you. It was meant to hold us all together. But when you tried to take it by force, you didn't step out of my shadow. You deepened it. Her shoulders trembled. For the first time in weeks, she did not argue back. She simply sat there, small, broken by the reflection of her own choices. The next days were harder for her still. Daniel informed me that the injunction froze all further sales. The trust made it impossible for Elise to claim ownership without my consent. And whispers did spread. Among neighbors, at Grace's school, in the small town where reputation clings like salt to skin. Elise tried to hold her head high, but the weight of suspicion bent her shoulders. Grace came to me one afternoon, her small hand clutching mine. "Mommy's sad," she whispered. "She cries when she thinks I'm asleep. She says people don't like her anymore." I held Grace close, my heart aching. "Your mommy is learning something very hard," I told her gently. "Sometimes when we make choices, they hurt us more than anyone else. But we can still choose again. We can always choose again." That night, as I watched the sea under the moonlight, I thought about Elise's face in the parlor. Defiant, yet wounded. Arrogant, yet desperate. This was the consequence of her actions. Not my punishment, not the court's ruling, but the mirror she could no longer avoid. The villa stood tall behind me, unbroken, but Elise, she was crumbling. And for the first time, I wondered if my silence had allowed the cracks in her to grow unchecked, until they shattered into betrayal. Perhaps her downfall was not just hers, but partly mine too. Still, I knew this. The law was not my weapon of revenge. It was my boundary. My reminder to Elise, and to myself, that love without respect is hollow. That even as a mother, I was not required to be erased. The storm had broken, and the aftermath was bitter. Elise's reputation suffered. Her pride lay wounded, and her relationship with me strained beyond recognition. These were her consequences. Yet, deep in my heart, I prayed they might also be her turning point. As I folded the handkerchief and placed it back in my pocket, I whispered to the night, "Let this be her lesson, not her end." When the storm with Elise began to quiet, the villa itself seemed to breathe again. For weeks, it had felt as though the walls carried tension, as though every creak of the floorboards echoed with conflict. But once the injunction was secured, and Elise no longer appeared at my door with demands or accusations, the silence changed. It was no longer sharp, but soft. No longer threatening, but healing. I began to walk the grounds each morning, something I hadn't done in years. The gardens had grown wild, vines climbing over the stone walls, roses choked by weeds. My husband had once tended every bush with care, and after his passing, I had let them grow unchecked, weighed down by grief. But now, with the villa safe, I found myself kneeling in the dirt, pulling weeds, trimming branches, coaxing life back into order. The first morning I worked until my knees ached, dirt clinging to my hands, sweat dripping down my back. Yet, I felt alive, more than I had in years. I whispered into the soil, "You will bloom again, and so will I." Grace often joined me after school. She carried her small watering can and insisted on giving each flower a sip. Her laughter filled the air, and I realized the villa was no longer just a battlefield. It was returning to what it was always meant to be, a sanctuary. Inside, I began to restore as well. The parlor curtains, long faded, were replaced with new ones in deep blue, the color of the sea outside. I polished the oak table until its surface gleamed, as though time itself had been lifted away. Each room became a project, not out of vanity, but out of reverence. Every corner deserved to breathe again. One afternoon, while sorting through an old trunk in the attic, I discovered boxes of letters. Letters my husband had written me when we were first married, filled with dreams of what this villa would mean for our family. His handwriting, careful and strong, spoke across decades. This home will not only shelter us, but carry us. It will outlast storms, grief, even us, because love, when built with patience, can last longer than stone. I sat there, the letters spread across my lap, and cried for the first time since the court battle began. Not tears of anger, but of release. The villa was not merely surviving. It was reminding me of who I was, who we had been, and who I could still become. Daniel visited a week later, bringing fresh papers that confirmed the trust was sealed beyond question. "It's safe now," he said simply. His eyes scanned the newly polished parlor, the flowers blooming in vases on the table. "And so are you." I smiled faintly. "Safe isn't just a matter of law, Daniel. It's a matter of spirit. And for the first time in years, mine feels steady." We shared tea in silence, the kind of silence that doesn't demand filling. Before leaving, Daniel paused at the door. "I've seen many cases of families torn apart by greed. Most never heal. But sometimes protection is the first step toward forgiveness." His words stayed with me. Could forgiveness truly be possible? Could Elise, who had nearly erased me, be allowed back into this space someday? I didn't know. What I did know was that forgiveness could not be forced. It had to grow, like the roses now beginning to bud again outside the villa walls. On Sundays, I opened the windows wide and let the sea breeze flow through the rooms. I played old records, the ones Elise used to dance to as a child. Grace would twirl across the rug, her arms outstretched, her laughter reminding me of echoes long past. The villa felt alive again, carrying music, carrying hope. Neighbors began to stop by, curious about the transformation. Some offered to help with the gardens, others brought paintbrushes for the shutters. It was not charity, it was community. They too had watched the battle unfold, and their presence was a quiet show of solidarity. The villa, once marked by scandal, was becoming a beacon again. One evening, Grace handed me another drawing. This time, the villa stood even taller, surrounded by flowers. 3 figures stood before it: me, Grace, and Elise again. But this time, she had drawn the 3 of us holding hands. My chest tightened. "Why did you draw us this way, Grace?" I asked gently. She shrugged, her small shoulders lifting. "Because one day Mommy will come back here, and you'll both be happy again." I didn't correct her. I only kissed her forehead and tucked the drawing into the same pocket where the handkerchief still lived. Children see hope, even when adults cannot. Perhaps she was right. Perhaps Elise's path had not yet ended in shadows. As I stood on the balcony that night, watching the sun set over the sea, I felt the villa breathe with me. Its walls were no longer heavy with betrayal, but light with possibility. It had survived storms, schemes, and silence. Now it was alive again, restored, not just in stone, but in spirit. I whispered into the breeze, "We are still here. We are still standing." And for the first time, I believed it fully. The night Daniel returned to the villa, the air was thick with salt from the sea and the faint scent of roses blooming after rain. I had spent the afternoon trimming the last of the wild vines, and by evening, my body ached pleasantly with the kind of fatigue that comes from honest work. When his car lights swept across the gravel drive, I felt both relief and hesitation. Relief because his presence always brought steadiness. Hesitation because I knew what he would ask me, the question I still avoided answering, even to myself. We sat on the veranda, a pot of chamomile tea between us. The waves below crashed with their eternal rhythm, as if to remind me that life goes on whether we sink or swim. Daniel poured the tea, his hands deliberate, his silence respectful. He never rushed me, and that was his strength. Finally, he broke the quiet. "The villa looks alive again," he said, his eyes scanning the freshly painted shutters and blooming garden. "And so do you." I smiled faintly, though my heart was heavy. "Alive doesn't mean healed, Daniel. Not yet." He studied me, his gaze steady but kind. "You've secured the trust. The law is on your side. The community has rallied. And Grace, she still runs through these halls with joy. What weighs you down now?" I looked into my teacup, the steam blurring my reflection. "Elise," I whispered. "Always Elise." He nodded slowly, as though he had expected this. "You fear what comes next with her." I sighed. Fear, grief, anger, it's all tangled. Part of me wants to believe she will change, that the lesson has struck deep. But another part of me wonders if I should even let her close again. What mother asks herself such a question? Daniel leaned back, his voice measured. A mother who has been wounded. A woman who has endured betrayal. "Vivian, you're not choosing between love and justice. You're choosing how to live with both." His words settled heavily. I traced the rim of my teacup, remembering Elise's tear-streaked face the night she raged in the parlor. Remembering her whisper, "I just wanted something of my own." Those words haunted me, not because they justified her actions, but because they revealed a wound she had carried silently. A wound I had not seen. "I keep asking myself," I said softly, "if my silence helped build that wound, if my strength became her prison. And if so, am I partly to blame?" Daniel leaned forward, his eyes intent. "Blame is easy. Healing is harder. You cannot rewrite Elisa's choices, but you can decide how much power they hold over you now. You've drawn a boundary, Vivian. That was necessary. The question now is whether you want the boundary to be a wall or a door." His words caught me off guard. A wall or a door? For weeks, I had thought only of survival, of protecting what was mine. But survival was not the same as living, and living, perhaps, meant leaving space for something more than bitterness. I closed my eyes for a moment, listening to the waves. "A door sounds merciful," I murmured. "But doors can be used to leave as easily as to return." Daniel's voice softened. "That is true, but mercy is not weakness. Mercy is power. The kind that says, I am strong enough to hold the key and wise enough to decide when to use it." I thought of Grace's drawings, always of 3 figures, never 2. Her innocent insistence that one day her mother and I would be whole again. Perhaps children draw not what they see, but what they need. Daniel poured me another cup of tea. You don't have to decide tonight. Forgiveness is not a switch. It's a path. And sometimes the first step is simply not closing the door all the way. His calm steadiness wrapped around me like the night air. I found myself telling him stories I had never shared before. The early years of the villa, the sacrifices my husband and I made, the nights I stayed awake counting coins to keep food on the table. I spoke of Elise as a child, her laughter echoing in the halls, her eagerness to prove herself. And I spoke of my fear, the fear that by protecting her too much, I had taught her nothing of responsibility. Daniel listened without interruption, his eyes never leaving mine. When I finished, there was no judgment in his silence, only understanding. You've carried too much alone, he said finally. Even silence has weight. Sharing it is not weakness, it's release. I looked out at the sea, the moonlight painting silver paths across the water. For the first time in months, I felt lighter, not because the burden had vanished, but because I had allowed someone else to help carry it. We sat there until the candles burned low, speaking less and less, until words gave way to the comfort of shared presence. When Daniel finally rose to leave, he paused at the gate and turned back. Remember, Vivian, walls keep out harm, but they also keep out light. Doors let light in. After he left, I walked through the villa once more, touching the walls, the photographs, the handkerchief folded neatly in my pocket. Daniel was right. I didn't have to forgive Elise fully yet, but I didn't have to close the door forever either. That night, as I lay in bed listening to the waves, I whispered to myself, maybe healing begins not with answers, but with the courage to leave the door unlocked. The morning after my long talk with Daniel, I sat at the oak table with the sunlight pouring in through the open windows. The villa smelled faintly of roses and salt air. My hands rested on the folded handkerchief as if it were a compass. I felt steadier than I had in months, but I also knew there were words still unsaid. Words not meant for lawyers, not meant for courts, but for the people I loved, and for the wounds between us. I reached for my stationery, the heavy cream-colored paper I had not touched in years. My husband had once teased me for keeping it locked in a drawer, insisting that someday I would use it for something meaningful. That day had finally come. The first letter I wrote was to Elise. My hand trembled at the start, but soon the words began to flow, not as accusations, but as truth. Elise, I began, there are wounds between us that no court ruling can heal. I cannot forget the betrayal, the forged signatures, the way you looked at me as if I were an obstacle. But I also cannot forget the little girl who once held my hand in the garden, who asked questions about the stars, who wanted me to sing her to sleep. Both versions of you live inside my heart, and I cannot throw one away without losing the other. I paused, pressing the pen to my lips, then continued. You said you wanted something of your own. I wish you had told me that, with honesty instead of deception. Perhaps we would have fought, but at least we would have fought face to face, not in shadows. The villa will remain in trust, beyond your reach for now. But my door is not locked. It waits for the day you come with truth instead of schemes, with humility instead of pride. On that day, Elise, I will listen. Until then, I will protect what must be protected, not only the villa, but the dignity of us both. I signed it simply, Mother. The second letter was for Grace. Her innocence had been the mirror that forced me to confront myself. I wanted her to know the story not as rumor, but as legacy. My dearest Grace, I wrote, one day you will be old enough to understand why people make choices that hurt the ones they love. Your mother and I have walked a difficult path. She made mistakes, and so did I. But what I want you to carry is this. Family is not about perfection. It is about responsibility. When love is real, it respects, it protects, it does not erase. Never let anyone convince you that love means surrendering your dignity. You are worth more than that. I added a line just for her. Keep drawing the villa, Grace. Your pictures remind me that beauty is always possible, even when walls feel broken. The third letter, I realized, was for myself. Not to be sent, not to be read by others, but to remind me of who I had become. Vivian, I wrote in slow, deliberate strokes, you have endured betrayal, but you did not crumble. You stood your ground without raising your voice. You carried silence not as defeat, but as strength. You chose truth over erasure. You are still here, and you are enough. By the time I finished, the afternoon light was fading. I placed Elise's letter in an envelope, sealing it, but leaving it unsent on the mantel. Grace's letter I tucked into the wooden box where I kept her drawings, knowing one day I would give it to her when she was ready. My own letter I slipped beneath the handkerchief in my pocket, a private vow to myself. That evening, I brewed another pot of tea and sat on the veranda. The waves rolled endlessly, the same waves that had once carried my husband and me through storms, the same waves that had watched Elise grow, and the same waves that now carried Grace's laughter back into these halls. I thought of Elise reading my words someday, whether with anger, regret, or tears. I thought of Grace, years from now, unfolding my letter and realizing her grandmother had once stood at the edge of despair, but chose to rise. And I thought of myself, no longer afraid of silence, no longer defined by loss. The villa had found its breath again, and so had I. Writing those letters was not the end, but a step. A bridge built in ink and truth, waiting for the day someone else might dare to cross. As the night deepened, I whispered into the darkness. I have spoken, not in shouts, not in accusations, but in words that will remain long after voices fade. I folded the handkerchief over my heart, carrying the weight of love, pain, and resolve together. For the first time, it felt not like a burden, but like a message in itself, a reminder that silence can wound, but it can also protect. And sometimes, silence gives birth to words that matter most. The morning after I wrote the letters, the sky was pale blue. The sea breathed steadily below the cliff. I took Grace's hand and walked the garden reclaimed from weeds. She named a butterfly. I told her that change can be quiet and still be true. The air smelled of salt and cut stems. Birds stitched the morning with small, bright calls. I breathed easier. When she left for school, the villa found its rhythm. I opened windows and let the breeze move through the rooms. On the oak table sat the sealed envelope for Elise. I had not decided when to send it. The choice felt more like a tide than a clock. I slid it into the drawer, not hidden, not displayed, simply waiting. That afternoon, the bell rang. It was Daniel with a brown paper bag and a modest smile. He brought soup. We ate on the veranda, listening to waves. He did not ask about Elise. Instead, he spoke about the harvest fair. The committee needed a venue for quilts and a student art wall. I looked at the villa's gallery and heard my husband's line in my head. This home will not only shelter us, but carry us. I told Daniel the gallery was open. The quilts could hang where the sun would find them. The children could tape drawings near the windows. That decision shifted something inside me. The villa was not only saved, it was returning to service. In the evening, after Daniel left, I brewed tea and stood on the balcony. The handkerchief lay against my heart. Below, a boat traced a silver line. I thought of Elise in the city with her unspent fury. I thought of the letter and the door I had chosen not to lock. I whispered I would wait, not as a doormat, but as a mother who knows some lessons ripen slowly. 2 days later, a voicemail arrived, small as a pebble. Mother, I saw the notice about the trust. I know everything is protected. I do not agree with you. I know you do not agree with me. Grace misses the garden. If there is a day she can visit, tell me. I will bring her, and I will not argue. Thank you for the letter. I am not ready to answer it. I am trying. The message ended. I listened twice. I felt a plain room open in my chest where hope could stand without pretending to be certainty. I sent one text. Sunday afternoon. Bring her for an hour. The gate will be open. On Sunday, the villa wore sunlight like a shawl. I set out lemonade. The handkerchief went into my pocket. When Elise's car turned onto the gravel, my hands trembled, but my feet stayed firm. Grace ran to me first, breath with happiness. I held her, steady as stone and soft as cloth. Elise followed slowly and kept her distance. Pride had learned to bend. We did not speak about courts or papers. We watched Grace water the roses with her small green can. After a long silence, Elise said, I am not ready to apologize. I am also not ready to stay away. I answered, I am not ready to forgive. I am ready to begin. She nodded once. Grace tugged our hands toward the gate. For a minute, 3 generations formed a quiet chain. The moment did not heal everything. It did not claim more than it could hold, but it held enough. When they left, the rooms stayed warm. I walked to the gallery and laid a clean cloth on the table for the quilting circle. I placed pencils for children to draw the sea. I left Elise's envelope in plain view. She chose not to take it. That night, I recorded words I want to remember. I am Vivian Hart. I am 68. I am keeper of a villa that belongs to a future larger than my grief. I will protect what must be protected. I will welcome what is ready to return. I will not vanish. If you are hearing my story and carry a hurt that will not quiet, take this with you. Choose a boundary. Choose a door. Hold both with the same steady hand. Speak when silence becomes erasure. Be silent when truth is already clear. Keep one small object you can press to your heart. Let it remind you that you are not disposable. I folded the handkerchief and turned off the lamp. The sea kept breathing. The house kept standing. The gate remained unlocked. Somewhere a daughter was choosing. Somewhere a child was dreaming of roses. The rest would come in its time. I would meet it standing,